It's February in the year 1812. Spencer Perceval is the Prime Minister of Great Britain and her Empire, and George III sits on the throne. And Monsieur Jean de L'Isle, a French artillery officer, probably would have walked down this road, the turnpike in the small Hampshire town of Alford. He would have got to approximately this point, and any further progress would have been prohibited. And so, with no other choice, he would have turned round and headed back into Alford. Just 2 years earlier, in 1810, Monsieur Pierre Ferrand, an infantry officer in Napoleon's Grande Armée, likely walked along this road, London Road, just to the north of the Hampshire village of Odium. On reaching this tree, ironically known today as Frenchman's Oak, he would have known he couldn't proceed any further, and so turning about, he had no choice but to return to Odium. These two accounts give rise to the question as to why two French military officers were freely wandering the roads of two English towns right in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, a time when Britain and France were locked in the throes of bloody conflict. Fought between 1803 and 1815, this period of history has been covered by historians in every conceivable way. But aside from the so-called glory, battle strategies and territorial gains, there are the inevitable miseries to be endured, not just by the injured survivors, but also those of the defeated armies, those many thousands who laid down their arms so soon after marching confidently beneath the imperial eagles, only to be herded into captivity. Transported to Britain, the prospect of rotting in a floating prison hulk moored in Portsmouth or Chatham Naval Base, or risking death by disease inside the squalid prisoner of war camps at Norman Cross near Peterborough or Porchester Castle on the south coast, was all that lay ahead of them. For some, however, the officer classes, who were considered gentlemen, men of honour, whose status meant something, and therefore better than the rank and file, and as such, should they meet the requirements, were eligible for parole, whereby after giving their word as an officer and a gentleman, they would promise not to attempt an escape. Then they were granted the privilege of integrating within the populations of a number of towns and villages on the strict basis that they obeyed a curfew, normally being indoors during dark hours, and a restriction of movement, usually within 1 mile of their billeting. This house on Odium High Street was one such billet. Here we have the modern overhead view of Odium, and by adding an approximation of distance of 1 mile from the village's centre, it roughly depicts the limits a paroled prisoner would have been restricted to. Now, looking at the northern extremity, we can see the site of Frenchman's Oak, where we were earlier. The tree known as Frenchman's Oak because it was situated exactly 1 mile north of Odium, the point of parole where prisoners had to turn around and return. And it's handily indicated by this milepost right here. Alford's paroled prisoners had similar restrictions imposed upon them. Looking at the town's modern overhead view, you can see the approximate distance prisoners were allowed to enjoy before the inevitable return to town. So, where do Jean de L'Isle and Pierre Ferrand fit into our story? Well, both were officers of Napoleon's armed forces, and both were paroled. One in Odium, the other in Alford. Other parole towns in Hampshire, or depots as they became known, were Andover, Bishops Waltham, Hambledon and Whitchurch, while Basingstoke, Fareham, Petersfield and Winchester had also been used before the Napoleonic Wars during the Wars of the French Revolution. No less than 122,000 French prisoners were brought to Britain during the Napoleonic Wars. When it had ended, most would return home, but nearly 10,500 did not, regrettably dying in captivity. Within that number were Jean de L'Huile and Pierre Ferrand. Here in All Saints Church in Odium, where alongside the church's north wall, you will come across these two graves on my right, and they are the resting places of Pierre Ferrand and his fellow officer and countryman Pierre Journoux. Pierre Ferrand's headstone translates to "Here lies Pierre Ferrand, captain in the 66th Line Regiment, knight of the French Empire, born in Reims, departed from Marne on August the 15th, 1766, and died in Odium on May the 8th, 1810. Directly behind is the memorial stone for Pierre Julien Journoux, which reads in English, son of Jean-Joseph Journoux and Marie-Charlotte Franconi, officer in the administration of the French Navy, born in the Isle of Ré, died in Odium September the 4th, 1809, in the 29th year of his life. It finishes with the statement at the bottom, he was a prisoner of war, death hath made him free. Returning to Alford, and St John the Baptist Church offers a spacious and peaceful cemetery. The church registers at Alford records that 9 parole prisoners died in the town during the war period, of which 5 graves are still identifiable. One of those belongs to Jean de L'Huile, along with another 3 of his countrymen, and also a lady of France. These 5 gravestones have, over the years, been lovingly tended and were replaced in the late 1950s, financed by the French authorities. Here lies Jean de L'Huile, lieutenant of the French artillery, died on August the 6th, 1812, aged 51, and it must be said that 51 was a very, very old age for a lieutenant. Here lies the body of Monsieur C. Laval, commercial officer, who died on December the 23rd, 1811, in the 29th year of his age. I'm not sure what a commercial officer was, but he may have been a civilian attached to the military. This grave belongs to Pierre Garnier, a sub-lieutenant in the 66th Infantry Regiment. Now, a considerable amount is known about Sub-Lieutenant Garnier. As his stone states, he was born on the 14th of April 1775 in Plessis-la-Forge in eastern France. At 21 he was called up and served in Italy and France in the 26th Infantry Regiment. Sent to the West Indies island of Guadeloupe, he sailed in the battleship Jemappes in January 1805. On promotion to sub-lieutenant, he was transferred to the 66th Infantry Regiment and was captured when British forces subsequently took the island on the 5th of February 1810. Just 6 months later, he was a prisoner of war at Porchester Castle, where he was described as 5'4", of a slender build with olive complexion, black eyes and no marks or wounds. On June the 19th, 1810, he arrived into Alford, paroled along with another 24 fellow officers. By April 1811, however, he had become ill and died on July the 31st. he was 36 years old. And interestingly, he served in the same regiment, the 66th, as Captain Pierre Ferrand, who rests in All Saints Church in Odium. I wonder if they knew each other. In this grave lies the body of Monsieur Joseph Hippolyte Riouf, an ensign in the Imperial and Royal Navy of France, who died on December the 12th, 1810, at the age of 28. The translation of the comment at the bottom of his grave is a bit sketchy, but I believe it says he carried away the regrets of all of his comrades and the people who knew him. The last headstone belongs to the wife of a French officer who had accompanied him into captivity. It was common for wives during the Napoleonic Wars to follow their husbands into war. Her stone translates to "Here lies the body of Marie-Louise Fournier, wife of Francois Berthet, captain of the French Imperial Artillery, who died on April the 11th, 1812, aged 44. The 5 who rest in Alford were all captured in the West Indies, which in the early 19th century was not a healthy place to be. Of the 2 who lay in Odium, Pierre Ferrand also suffered the same fate, along with the rest of the 66, and also likely died from an unknown pestilence. Between them, these 7 citizens of France represent just a handful of those who never returned home.